The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for this beautiful spring day, a reminder of the blessing of life that is renewed each year. We thank you for the earth that continues to give abundantly for all its people, for the farmers and families that produce in Minnesota. We especially ask you for help finding a solution for the sake of our poultry farmers and producers who are dealing with a great challenge of influenza. Beyond this, we thank you for the state of Minnesota and its people and for our nation. We thank you for those who serve in countless ways, those who protect, police, fire, medical, armed forces, and for those who nurture, teachers, social workers, nonprofits, and many others. Give them hearts that are full, that they might continue to help and bless those in need. Finally, bless our president and the leaders of this nation. Bless our governor and the leaders of our state, that they may guide us. And bless especially these members of the Minnesota State House of Representatives, that they would have your wisdom, insight, and guidance for the sake of leading this great state. We pray to you, Creator of us all. Bless us and give us your wisdom and peace. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Reverend John Weisenberger from Our Savior's Lutheran Church, Owatonna, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 89th session, 52nd day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Friday, May 1st, 2015.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. The member from Washington, Representative Schoen, for what purpose do you rise?
Privilege of the House, Mr. Speaker.
State your privilege of the House.
First, Mr. Speaker, I just want to let everybody know that on Thursday will be Supermom's Day here, so we'll have plenty of rolls and goodies here in the retiring room and probably all over the place, so be prepared for that in the morning. And then also I'd like to rise to recognize our great firefighters from the state of Minnesota and the Minnesota Professional Firefighters and every other organization in all of our cities and groups that they serve. I know that they're here to lobby today on the flame-retardant bill, and I'd just like to point out, I know my buddy Joe Madison is up there from Minneapolis Fire Department. That guy's fallen through more roofs and been burnt up more times than I've been punched at work, and that's a lot. So I just want to thank them for all their work. And then I'll have a question for the majority leader after we recognize our firefighters. And Mr. Speaker, would Representative Pepin rise for a question?
She will yield. Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I didn't know that this is probably a little out of the ordinary, but I'm just curious if you can give us a roadmap. All the firefighters are here looking at House File 1100, which is the flame-retardant bill. If you could give us an update on when we might see that to the floor and get that out of committee so we can get that. I know it's been through the Senate, and it's got great support. Representative Howe is the chief author in the House, and hoping that we can see that soon. While they're here, I'm hoping you can give an update.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Schoen. As you probably know, the bill did get a hearing in HHS policy. I believe it's sitting in Commerce and potentially working the way through the process. And of course, it didn't meet the rules or the committee deadline, but we'll continue to discuss it and see where we end up.
Thank you.
Comparison reports. There are copies of this order of business on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail and the substitutions will be made. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File number 390.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File number 488.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File number 621.
Second reading. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading, Senate File number 253.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 462.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 1191.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 1438.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 1523.
Second reading.
Second reading, Senate File 1679.
Second reading. Introduction of House files. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 2295 through 2302.
First reading, House files 2295 through 2302. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the following Senate file. Senate File number 2101, an act relating to state government. And the Senate has respectfully requested the conference committee be appointed therein. The Senate has appointed as such committee Senators Tomassoni, Cohen, Sparks, Jensen, and Osmek. Signed, Joanne M. Zoff, Secretary of the Senate. Garofalo moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses on Senate File number 2101.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to your motion.
Mr. Speaker, that is my motion.
Any discussion on the Garofalo motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails.
Yep.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for today is House File 1437. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1437, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to agriculture.
I recognize the bill author, the member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and committee members. This bill is the Omnibus Agriculture Finance Bill. And first of all, I'd like to thank Vice Chair Deb Keel and our lead Representative Gene Poppy as well for your help and your leadership. It's an absolute honor to be able to chair this committee. Agriculture is an honorable, noble profession, and it's fun to work with all walks of life, if you will, because this is stuff that affects every single one of our lives every single day. The bill itself deals with the funding and finance around the Department of Agriculture, Board of Animal Health, the Agriculture Utilization Research Institute, and then where you have components in here for the avian influenza emergency response. And to that point, I know we have some amendments up, but I would like to do some special recognition to Representative Bly and your leadership on this early on, Representative Miller, and I know Representative Baker and others have been working very, very hard on this. I also want to recognize Chair Paul Anderson. He's done a remarkable job leading the Agriculture Policy Committee, and I thank you for your leadership there as well. Members, what this bill does, the Department of Agriculture put a strong focus on food safety. That was their #1 initiative. We worked very, very closely with Commissioner Fredrickson, the assistant commissioners as well, and I also want to thank Mr. Santo Cruz. It's been an absolute joy working with you. And again, we focused a lot on food safety. Some of the additional bills that were components to the omnibus bill, I want to thank Representative Fabian for leading the initiative on wolf and elk depredation. We had Representative Petersburg along with Representative Schultz as it pertains to, local food hubs. And we had Representative Paul Anderson as it pertains to E15 pump grants. We also had Representative Poppy on mental health. She's always been a strong leader on that. Representative Bly on your Forever Green initiative. Thank you for bringing that forward. Representative Applebaum, you talked about the permitting process and working with the Department of Agriculture to help streamline that. I want to thank you for your leadership there. Representative Newberger on your cottage foods. I know we're going to be hearing about you later or additional amendments on that and your perspective. I also want to thank again Representative Miller for your livestock study in here to understand what we need to do as a state to continue to support and advocate for additional livestock to be cited right here. Representative Swazinski, your bait fish study as it pertains to that. Representative Metza, this was fun working with Representative Metza on this policy as it pertains to a vocational training pilot program to get additional people trained in as far as processing and working as in the processing arena, if you will. And then also Representative Clark, it's been a true joy working with you on urban agriculture initiatives, and it pertains to that. I also want to give a special thank you to Mr. McDonald and Ms. Nimley for your information and coming in and testify on the Council on Black Minnesotans. Mr. Cheney with Project Sweetie Pie. We had a remarkable young man come in by the name of Mr. Martinez. He was a young man, and he was advocating on urban agriculture as well, and just did a remarkable job. And it was interesting, a gentleman that came in, Mr. Howard, came in and spoke about the additional initiatives as it pertains to urban agriculture and how not only does it give people local food source, but also, like he said, it keeps kids out of trouble, if you will. It gives them stuff to do. I was also told that it is a very, very nice day, and they said, Hamilton, please keep your comments short. I'm happy to answer any questions. There are two other initiatives. We brought a number of groups together, and they wanted us to focus on agriculture education, ag research, and rapid response. There's a provision in the bill that does just that. And then also as it pertains to advanced bioeconomy initiatives, and there's some language in the bill that would invest there. That the University of Minnesota did a study on that, and it said it will create up to 12,000 jobs by 2025 and have a huge economic benefit for the state of Minnesota. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll stand for questions, or I'm happy to start taking up amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Baker moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment, as follows, and the amendment is coded A32.
The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I rise to an amendment that has been kind of a fluid amendment moving along. We were able to visit with the Commissioner Franz last week to solidify the numbers with our need for additional funding for the next, actually for this current biennium, which we've done part of, again, thanks to Representative Bly, and also to finish and properly fund the next 2 years for this avian flu that is still moving swiftly through our flocks and our farms. Over the weekend, I think we pushed over the 4 million bird loss number, and the numbers are still rising as we speak, but the emergency team is on the ground working hard. So this bill appropriates, is asking for another $6 million of funding, which will help in different areas. Quickly, the Department of Ag needs the funding to help with overtime, in-state travel, helping reimburse the local governments of units that are also costing a lot of extra overtime locally. Folks on the ground, but they are responding very, very quickly. The Board of Animal Health, we are getting a portable lab out there finally in Wilmer soon to do the testing quicker, so we can put the diseased birds down faster, so that prevents less exposure to the disease going forward. The Department of Health needs some funding to help monitor the personnel, the humans that are coming in contact in the barns with these diseased turkeys, so that they're safe and they're protected. Appropriations from the DNR. We've got to have extra staff out there making sure that the birds that are flying around and their droppings and their evidence has been tested and vetted to see where this disease is actually coming from. And finally, the Department of Public Safety. Again, they're the ones who are helping run the Operations Center, and again, the agriculture facility in Wilmer, which seems to be sort of the center of this great outbreak that we're experiencing. So with that, members, I strongly encourage a green vote to help our farmers that are in desperate need. So thank you, members, and I stand for questions.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Baker moves to amend his amendment to House File 1437, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A45.
The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker, to your amendment, A45.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is just a technical change. It makes sure that the Commissioner of MMB can move funds around between different departments, that maybe if public safety doesn't use all their money, they can transfer it to the Board of Animal Health. The dollars do not change, but it gives the Commissioner the ability to change between the departments. That's all that does. Thank you.
Any discussion on the Baker A45 amendment? The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the author of the amendment yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Baker. What departments are we talking about, and what unspent funds are we talking about?
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Mahoney. As I mentioned earlier, the departments that are being allocated more money would include the Department of Ag, Board of Animal Health, Department of Health, Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Public Safety. So those specific departments would be allocated additional funding, and then the Commissioner has the ability, if needed, to move funds between them if one runs out or one runs short, but the total dollars will stay the same. Those are the specific departments receiving additional funding for the remainder of this year as well as the next biennium.
Representative Mahoney.
So this is, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Baker. This is just a yes or no. So there are no other departments, no other agencies than the 4 that you listed there. It's not the Department of Health or Department of Employment and Economic Development. It's not any of the others. It's just those ones that you spoke to today. Because many other departments have open-ended funding, so to speak, until expended. And sometimes that kind of, in the past, we've mistaken unexpended funds for funds that weren't, that were earmarked for projects that were a year and a half out. So I'm just trying to make sure that it's only those 4 departments that you're talking about.
He will yield. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, to Representative Mahoney's question, it's only those departments listed on this amendment and only as it pertains to the avian flu.
Any further discussion to the Baker A45 amendment? The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members, and Representative Baker, thank you for your work on this amendment and your work on the whole influenza outbreak. We've waited a long time to get these numbers, and you've put this together, and these are the best estimates we've gotten from each of these departments, so I would encourage a green vote for this amendment. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adopting the Baker A45 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
McNamara moves to amend the Baker Amendment to House File 1437, second engrossment, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A48.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment's technical, and if you have any questions, Representative Hamilton can answer it. I happen to be around here at 5:45 on Friday, and that's why I'm the author of the amendment.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to make sure Representative McNamara had something in the bill as well so that I could get his vote. I'm just teasing. This is, just like Representative McNamara stated, it is a technical amendment. If you recall, Representative Bly, myself, and Representative Miller were on a conference committee, and we pushed forward a bill that was signed into law, and we just wanted to make sure that we had the language so it was not duplicated in this bill as well. So I ask for your support.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the McNamara A48 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bly moves to amend the Baker Amendment as amended to House File 1437, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A49.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Speaker. And no disrespect to Representative Baker, I certainly want to see his bill go forward. I received a call today from the MMB saying that they were concerned about some of the technical language in the amendment that we're considering. And my amendment would replace the language that MMB sent me that fits what they want. So that's the nature of my amendment. It is the same as a bill that was introduced today, 2296, House File 2296, if you wanted to reference that. But it's related to the conversation I had with Myron Franz to make sure that the language was exactly the way they wanted it. Thank you.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Bly. I ask everybody to support this amendment. I did check with others. There are dollars available in 2015. Once again, this is why I enjoy serving on this, this committee. Thank you for bringing this forward, and I ask for your support.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Bly A49 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend the Baker Amendment as amended to House File Number 1437, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A46.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment would provide extra unemployment benefits to the poultry workers who are displaced because of the avian flu crisis. Currently, the unemployment insurance provides 26 weeks. So if we look at the clock or the calendar here, we're at the beginning of May. We're not sure when we come back in next year, so the 26 weeks could expire. This amendment would provide additional 13 weeks to those workers who are displaced because of the avian flu crisis, and I would ask for your support.
The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, I think this is a great idea. I would wholeheartedly ask the members to support this amendment to the amendment. I know out there right now the pipeline is still busy with grabbing birds early, but producers and growers and suppliers are going to see a need for this in a short time. So members, I support this and hope we get a green vote on this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We've done this in a number of different areas and different times when industries have faced a severe crisis. The trust fund at this particular time, the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, is I don't want to say fat, but it's got enough money to cover it without any real trouble. So I hope we can all get 134 votes, green votes up on this board. Thank you.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hansen yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Representative, I like your amendment. It talks about workers laid off at a producer. What about those laid off at a processing plant? Could we also include those as well? Because they may face shorter hours if, in fact, the supply of birds is reduced because of this outbreak. Would you stand for a friendly amendment?
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Anderson, I would, but I think we have to follow the rules, and I would encourage, and maybe, Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity for us to show support for the workers, to have a roll call to show the 134 strong green votes for this in negotiations with the Senate. So I would ask for roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear an affirmative or negative response to that, but we also are concerned about those working in the processing plants, and I think we should think about those as well.
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, and I would support that, but we can't do it under the rules. So I think if the conference committee can work on that, that would be helpful.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen, for bringing this forward. You know, as we're addressing this issue, as it pertains to not only the government entities that are working extremely, extremely hard, getting them the dollars, the resources that they need in order to address this issue, but with your amendment, you're talking about specifically the importance of dealing with the issues around employees and employment. Chair Anderson is going to have an amendment coming up here a little bit as well as it pertains to the producers. And as we're going into conference committee and we continue having these discussions, I'm looking for additional language that we can take into conference committee as well as we're addressing the complete spectrum, if you will. So I ask for everybody's support on this amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the A46 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A46 Hansen amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 111 ayes and 15 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Members, we're now back on the A32 Baker Amendment as amended. Any further discussion on the Baker Amendment as amended? A32. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Baker A32 Amendment as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Baker moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second Grossman as amended. The amendment is coded A40.
The member from Candy-Ojai, Representative Baker, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill that would help with the current the disaster recovery loan program that will help turkey growers, turkey suppliers to increase investments in their farms, in their flocks, to repopulate if they need the money. Farmers would go through their local banks or their financial institutions, and the state would help with the additional low-interest loans. So this is a loan program. According to the folks in the office and through the bankers, farmers are one of the best, most secured loans there are out there. They're very, very good at paying their money back. So we ask for your support so that farmers can reinvest in better infrastructures, better securities to make sure that the barns are clean. And so this will help poultry as well as turkey farmers and growers. So this low interest loan program is what the idea is, and I would appreciate your support, members. Thank you.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Baker moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 1437, the second of Grossman as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A44.
The member from Candy-Ojai, Representative Baker, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This was just a technical change. I felt that the wording cover loss of revenue was a bit vague. I think it's better to maybe put in obtain an operating line of credit to use the funding basically to either make payroll, to pay off the current obligations, but this is not meant to pay off old notes or old loans. This is only for operating line of credits going forward. Just a technical change, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Any discussion on the Baker A44 amendment? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Baker A44 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Members, we're now back on the Baker A40 amendment as amended. Further discussion to the A40 amendment as amended. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the A40 Baker amendment as amended signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the amendment as amended is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Poppy moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A29.
The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. One of the issues that we've heard about with regards to the avian flu disaster is that there's an emotional cost to it as well. So there's definitely a financial cost, but there's an emotional cost. And the first amendment is regarding the need to cover any costs that aren't going to be covered through the federal government or previously have been identified. So that's what the original amendment is, and I would ask for your support.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Poppy is moving to amend her amendment to House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A47.
The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So now to the issue about the mental health counseling. Last week, Representative Anderson and I went to a meeting that was held between Department of Health, Department of Ag, Board of Animal Health, DNR. Everyone was there that was previously talked about in Representative Baker's initial amendments. They were there to talk about the services they're providing and what they are doing on behalf of all of the farmers and producers and the impact and how they're covering the time in the office and who's doing what in order to assist in this quite serious situation. One of the questions I asked was regarding mental health counseling and ongoing needs. And when I spoke with the woman from the Department of Health, because they're taking care of the people side of things, she mentioned that at this point, the response is just an immediate response. They're trying to take care of things as things happen right away, and it's quite quickly transpiring, and so they're trying to be there to immediately help people, but that there will be a recovery time, and during that recovery time, it's unclear how much emotional support and assistance they'll need to be providing, but at this point, they are doing that. Also through the MNSCU has a program for mental health counseling, and so they're also providing it, and this is going to be a long-term issue. So I'd appreciate your support that we also consider not only the financial needs for all of these farmers and producers, but the emotional assistance that they will also need. Thank you.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Poppy, for bringing this forward. You've always been a champion on this issue. I ask everybody to support the amendment to the amendment and the amendment to follow. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Poppy A47 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Members, we're now back on the Poppy A29 amendment as amended. Any further discussion to the A29 amendment as amended? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the A29 amendment as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Newberger moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A15-0650.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment is the final, irons out the final wrinkle that we had with the cottage food bill. It also pertains to the farmers markets. When we met in the Ag committee, when we talked about the Omnibus policy bill, there was a number of concerns about health and safety issues. We had the votes, members, in committee to just steamroll this through, but I didn't want to do that. I saw the concerns that some of my friends on the other side of the aisle had, so I sat down with some of the commissioners from Ag, and we hammered out a final amendment that addresses the health and safety concerns. This is a really good bill. Part of this bill. It's probably one of the most bipartisan bills that we'll have this session, and I'm very pleased to offer it, and I stand for any questions. Thank you.
Discussion of the Newberger amendment. The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Thank you, Representative Newberger. You worked extremely hard bringing all the groups together, if you will. We had amendments not only in our committee, but also in Ways and Means and now on the House floor. He's worked very, very hard, and I ask for everybody's support. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the on the Newberger amendment? I'll call it that. Any further discussion? Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just have a question for Representative Newberger, if he would yield.
He will yield. Representative Poppe.
Thank you. Representative Newberger, you talked about how you had a discussion with Department of Ag, but I know, and food safety is clearly one of their top priorities, but I know that especially in the avian flu issue, we've heard more from the Department of Health, and when it comes to food safety, the Department of Health is also concerned about that. So I'm wondering if you also had discussions with Department of Health regarding this particular bill.
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Poppe. That's an excellent question. First of all, let me make one thing clear. There is no connection between the cottage food or the farmers market industry and the avian flu crisis that we're currently experiencing. Two completely different things. We had discussions in depth and ongoing, myself and Senator Dibble, with all of the stakeholders. That did include the Department of Health early on, also the Department of Agriculture, the Grocers Association, the cottage food people, the farmers markets. We even had the city of Minneapolis in because they were concerned about some zoning issues. So the Department of Health, they were one of the stakeholders. Being that this falls under the purview of the Department of Agriculture, they didn't see the need to further bring in any more agencies. They were happy to handle this for us, and I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I ask Representative Newberger to yield to another question, please.
Thanks.
He will yield. Representative Poppe.
Thank you. And Representative Newberger, the other issue that the Department of Ag raised was the two-tier approach, that there are people who are going to be selling their food and they're making less than $5,000. That's going to be different from those that earn receipts higher than $5,000. And I just wanted to know if you were able to come to any further conclusion. I know that this will continue to promote a two-tiered system, and I just wanted to see what you found out about that. Thank you.
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Representative Poppe. Again, that's an excellent question. Members, I hate the word two-tiered when it's applied to this, so please erase that from your minds. First of all, let me make one thing clear. There's been a number of really good questions from people saying, hey, this is going to eliminate our church suppers, our pie sales, our 4-H or our community group events. This does not apply to them at all. This is a completely different section of law, so the folks that were doing that before, they stay the same. Nothing changes for them. We were real clear with that. What this does is it classifies people. There's the first level, there's the occasional people that want to give it a try. They can earn up to $5,000, which at this time, the current law, that's the cap. If you want to make a little extra money, the most you are held to a limit of $5,000. What this does is it enables people to go up to $18,000. In both levels, there's going to be some food safety training. For the occasional folks that are $5,000 and under, it's free. There's no registration cost. There's no cost for the little online class that they'll take through the Ag Department. Everything is free for them. Once they go above the $5,000 mark, there's a $50 registration fee, and it's good for that's good for the year, and then they have to take a food safety class through an additional food safety class. One day, it's good for 3 years. Folks, considering all the other hoops that every other business has to jump through, this is a pretty darn good deal. I hope that clears that up for you.
Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Newberger. Just one final question, because I'm not sure if you stated this or not, but whether or not everyone who is going to be involved in this are registered with the state. I think that was another concern, and so I just wanted to make sure, even if they don't pay a fee, if they're still registered.
He will yield. Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Poppe. If you are just doing it as an occasional event for your church suppers, for your pie sales, for your bake sales, no. Nothing has changed in the law there. If you're doing it, if you're looking at it as a means of supplemental income, then yes, everyone would have to register. And again, it's free if you're under $5,000.
Any further discussion on the Newberger amendment? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Newberger amendment coded A15-0650 signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Rarick moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A33.
The member from Pine, Representative Rarick, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This is an amendment seeking financial help from the federal government in regards to our depredation fund. I think we all remember back in December, a federal judge took away the state's ability to regulate the wolf population in Minnesota and took away a farmer's ability to protect his livestock. It is an issue that has been a very, very important one in my area and those especially in northern Minnesota. I've been to several meetings with farmers from my local area that have had a major, major problem with the wolf and having their livestock taken. And we all have, on ag policy and ag finance, we've been hearing from many farmers around the state who have needed help from the depredation fund, and we've seen how the fund just has not had enough money in it. This year we are appropriating $400,000 to deal with depredation, $100,000 of which is to pay claims that were unpaid for this last year. We have $150,000 appropriated for each of the next 2 years. When we look at what a typical calf value is worth per claim, each claim is approximately $1,100. So if we round that down for simple math to $1,000 per claim, only 150 farmers per year are going to be able to receive compensation under the depredation fund. So what we're asking is, being it is a federal mandate that has come down to limit the farmers' ability to protect their own livestock, we are asking that the federal government then in turn help pay out of the depredation fund. So we're asking the commissioner from the Department of Ag to submit a bill to the federal government to help whenever we pay out of the depredation fund. Like I said, there's several meetings that I have been to with farmers, and talking to a member from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Pine County is the #1 area receiving claims right now, asking for a federal trapper to come in for help. Carlton County is #2 in the state right now. And so with that, I would like to yield to Representative Sundin to address this as well.
The member from Carlton, Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Rarick, for bringing forward this amendment. It is very important to some of the farmers in northern Minnesota and north central Minnesota. When you talk about a dead cow or a dead calf, it doesn't mean much to a lot of people throughout the state, but to that farmer, that rancher, that's a paycheck. Just imagine your paycheck being taken away from time to time, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. That's not such a good deal. Yeah, on December 19th, U.S. District Judge Howe made a ruling and placed the wolves back on the endangered species list, and that threatens the paychecks of so many of the ranchers throughout Minnesota. I fully support this amendment. I plan on supporting it this year, and I think next year we may actually have an expansion of this to seek compensation for pet owners as well. In my district and in Representative Murphy's district, we've got to date 7 dogs that have been consumed by the timber wolf, and the residents up there are getting plenty tired of it. And you figure what you have into a pet as well. You may have north of $1,000 into a family pet that's lost to a timber wolf. So thank you, Representative Rarick, for bringing this forward, and I urge the body to support it fully.
Any further discussion on the Rarick A33 amendment? The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I understand it, there's some more dollars being allocated to this. If Representative Rarick would yield, there's some more dollars being allocated in this bill for the depredation.
He will yield. Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, are you referring to more this year than from the previous? Is that what your question is?
That, I guess, is my question, yes.
Yes, there is a bit more from previous years. I believe 50,000 more per year.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess this is fine. I mean, basically it's saying we're going to ask the federal government to give us money that they don't have any obligation to give us. And I guess my question is, why aren't we just, if we have a problem here with this depredation, why aren't we actually appropriating more state money to be able to address the issue? Because if we were to actually appropriate some more state money, then we know we would have that money there for the farmers, instead of passing a provision here that just says, please, federal government, give us some more money. And maybe I don't understand the whole thing, but I'm just understand. It looks like Representative Fabian may have an answer.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, to Representative Rarick, thanks for bringing this forward. You know, in the parts of the state where we are impacted by the timber wolves, the control of the wolf has been taken away from us. The federal government has taken that away through the courts and so forth, and whether or not they actually will pay the bill that we're asking the Department of Agriculture to submit to the federal government. For us who have been working on this for a couple of months now since the judge's ruling came down, it's a part of maybe getting our Washington delegation behind making sure that we do get some legislation moving through Congress to restore the protection that we had before by being able to have our seasons here and have the DNR manage the wolves, and have the wolves be managed here at the state level rather than being managed in Washington, D.C. I do have an amendment. I did have a bill, and it did get a hearing, and it is a part of this bill. The total that's going into that for wolf depredation is $400,000, which is an increase from the previous biennium. And as Representative Rarick mentioned, one of the things that's also happening is that there's going to be roughly $100,000 worth of claims for this fiscal biennium that are not being paid now because the account has run out. I just had a conversation today with a guy named Virgil from Greenbush, Minnesota, who had a calf that was taken last Wednesday and now is in the process of going through that to make sure it's confirmed with DNR that it was indeed a wolf kill, and that's going to be another one that we're going to have to account for.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate all of that. And this is something we obviously have to deal with. But I guess my question is, why aren't we actually appropriating state money to solve the problem instead of trying to make a political point here? If we're missing $100,000 right now for the fiscal year 15, is there a reason we're not? We have money on the bottom line in fiscal year 15, as I understand it. Is there a reason we're actually not appropriating money to actually solve the problem instead of passing language that essentially is meaningless?
Are you asking him to yield? No. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, we are appropriating more. I think it's $150,000 more. It's more than what was in the governor's recommendations. And I have worked very closely with the Department of Ag, and I know that our staff has too, trying to extrapolate a number that's going to get us to a good spot at the end of June so that the dollars will be available to go back and pay those unpaid claims. And then also they have factored in what the value of a calf is now or a cow is now, done a historical look at how many were taken in the past and trying to calculate that coming forward. And quite frankly, if we get to next year and we have to make some adjustments, we can do that too. But thank you for the question and the discussion, members.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, to that question, I'd just like to draw your attention to line 26 on the spreadsheet. And it'll show you what the governor's recs and what the House recs as far as what the dollars that we have allocated in the bill. And Representative Fabian's absolutely correct. We did increase the appropriations in this area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion on the RARIC A33 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the RARIC A33 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Anderson P. moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second grossman as amended, and the amendment is coded A39.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson, to explain your amendment.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, members. And first of all, this is not intended to raid the wolf depredation fund at all. It is a way for us to get language into the bill that if there is some additional funding available in conference, we can at least have the language that we may look at that. The money we've appropriated so far has gone to agencies, and well, it should, but nothing so far has gone to the actual producers. And there have been a couple of measures proposed. I had one of them a little bit too late to get into a bill form and get into this bill. So again, this amendment is just to allow that if additional money is available, that we could look at providing some compensation to turkey producers because of the influenza outbreak. And I would ask for your support.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I commend Representative Anderson for this amendment. This is an option that certainly should be considered in conference committee. There are things that I appreciate today, that we are doing things that are addressing some of the issues facing our producers and their employees, and they need to be considered as well. There is, as one of my producers commented, an invisible disaster that's facing Minnesota and its turkey producers. I had one farm located not far from where I live where 310,000 turkeys were euthanized. And this goes beyond the immediate crisis of the avian influenza. There are producers struggling to hold on to their operations, struggling to keep employees working. And we have to look at ways to address this, look at other options, and I hope that through the process as we go along that we'll be able to do that. So I support this amendment.
Any further discussion on the Anderson A39 amendment? Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Anderson yield to a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, when you're in your amendment, you talk about compensating commercial producers. Who owns the birds? It's my understanding there are a variety of ownership methods where you may have contractors, subcontractors, and ownership. When you're saying producers, who are you talking about?
Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hansen, I left that open as you say that there are different methods of ownership and how the operations work. I didn't address that here, and that could be worked out in committee. My thought is to work with private owners, but a lot of turkeys are owned by processors as well. So we didn't address that here, and that would be addressed in conference.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Anderson would yield to another question.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Representative Anderson, for losses attributable, it's my understanding that the federal government is picking up the cost for those birds that are euthanized. So in terms of response to try to prevent future distribution, but is it your intent that this would be for birds that had died because of a compensation for the birds that had died because of the highly pathogenic avian influenza?
Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. That was the idea that I brought forward. It's one of several ideas that may work. As you know, some of the earlier cases, it took several days before the results of the test came back, and they lost a lot of birds to the disease before the indemnification takes place. And just an additional thought, as you mentioned, those that are depopulated are reimbursed by USDA, and they make no call. They reimburse all birds, whether owned by private folks or by companies.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I'm in this crisis, and I think everybody agrees it's a crisis, Minnesotans want to respond. And in the amendment that I had provided earlier, I looked for precedent, and I saw we had some precedent. I've searched for some precedent on what we're doing here, and I think we had the bovine tuberculosis where we had provided loans. I think the governor is providing some loans, but I'm not sure if we've provided compensation for loss due to disease. And my concern is that if we pay for one, we pay for all. So whatever cost that, if we set this precedent, and I don't think we've set that precedent before, we've paid for disasters, but we haven't provided for loss, then we will be paying for disease loss for swine, for cattle, for other agricultural pursuits because we have done this. So what about the hog producers last year? That worries me. And I understand your intent and the idea to provide help. I think there may be other ways to provide help than providing direct compensation for loss. I'm not sure we've gone that far before, and I think that's a concern that taxpayers may have in opening or setting that precedent for the future.
Any further discussion on the Anderson A39 amendment? Representative Anderson.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker. Just one final comment, and I take your words seriously. I believe back when we had the tuberculosis outbreak, there were herd buyouts, and the state did buy out cattle herds up in the northern part of the state. So if that set a precedent, I'm not sure, but we have done some buyouts of livestock in the past.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton. Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just following along the lines of Representative Hansen, I too appreciate that we need to do everything we can to help in this crisis and to assist the farmers, producers, the workers, because it's just a critically serious issue, and it's something that we have to be able to address. But I also have a bit of a concern just about opening that door on how we do compensate for losses and what reaches that threshold that is the level that we're going to be able to compensate for. And so I appreciate, Representative Anderson, what you're trying to do to get this out there and to consider it. But I do think we need to move ahead with some caution, because I'm not sure that this is necessarily the right approach yet. And hopefully we can continue to have conversations. Unfortunately, this is a crisis and we're in the midst of it. But it does seem to be something that needs a little bit more conversation about, including with the producers. Certainly we all represent, for the most part, many of us represent farmers and producers of some type or another. I happen to have more hog farmers in my area, more pork producers, and so I think the PED-V situation was critically serious for them, much like this is critically serious for turkey growers. So I just wanted to raise that issue because I'm just a little concerned about where we're going with this.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. And we're all a little bit concerned. And it's interesting. We've had a number of conversations with Chair Anderson, and he's been doing his due diligence to trying to find a workable solution. And Representative Hansen, a lot of your same concerns. My colleague right the right of me here, Representative Baker, brought up many of those concerns as well. And that's why he brought forth that loan proposal. And what Chair Anderson's wanting to do is keep this conversation alive. And that's where you'll see, as far as where the dollars or the fund, as far as where the language is, none of us want to take that money away from the farmers who have issues with wolf depredation. But we are wanting to keep this topic alive. And Chair Anderson has been very, very thoughtful. I know he's going to continue reaching out to everybody in this body as well, as we hopefully continue moving this forward. And this is a nonpartisan issue. And so, of course, we're going to be working with the lead on agriculture, obviously work with all the members. We want to get this right. So I ask for everybody's support on this so we can continue having the conversations.
Any further discussion on the Anderson A39 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Anderson A39 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Khan moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A30.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to explain your amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, this is the this amendment was actually originally a bill, was passed unanimously by the Agriculture Committee and also unanimously by the Agricultural Finance Committee. It then got sent to Public Safety where it didn't quite get heard. But anyway, what has provoked this amendment is that the federal government has dramatically changed its position on the cultivation of industrial hemp. And we are now, if we pass this, we will be completely abiding with federal law, which allows the Department of Agriculture to do a pilot program in the growth of industrial hemp, but only provided that the state laws allow for it. In case you think that this is somehow a subtle liberal plot, we are behind two states not known for their liberal tendencies, and that's the state of North Dakota that just went in this direction this year, and the state of Kentucky, which under strong pressure from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell passed the law that has put them 2 years ahead of us in terms of hemp production. So I guess I'd like to yield to my co-author on the amendment, Representative Franzen, and go on from there.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. First off, the bill that Representative Khan and I have authored, the Industrial Hemp Act, does have 34 co-signers. So I'm just going to go over the bill a little bit. The 2014 Federal Farm Bill contained a provision known as Section 7606 titled The Legitimacy of Industrial Hemp Research. This provision exempts industrial hemp from the Controlled Substance Act and permits state agricultural departments and institutions of higher education to participate in industrial hemp research pilot projects under certain conditions. It further defines industrial hemp as containing no more than 0.3% of THC content, which is a very trace amount. 21 states currently have laws that meet the requirements of Federal Section 7606. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Maine, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, and West Virginia. Industrial hemp is not marijuana. It contains, by definition, insignificant amounts of THC. Its primary applications include products derived from seeds and materials derived from stalks. And you will have on your desk a flyer talking about industrial hemp and what the seeds and hemp stalks can be made out of. The amendment establishes a regulatory framework for an industrial hemp pilot project in Minnesota consistent with federal guidelines established in Section 7606. Last year, Kentucky planted a whopping 34 acres of hemp. The first year of hemp production is always small. We here in Minnesota have a tremendous opportunity today to establish a small-scale pilot project on industrial hemp. Through this research, Minnesota can gain valuable information on hemp applications and cultivation, establishing foundation for what could become a new agricultural and production sector, creating jobs for rural Minnesota. As a matter of fact, Minnesota at one point in time was a leader in hemp production, and this was during World War II. Hutchinson had a manufacturing plant, and that plant has now been repurposed to 3M, and that is in Representative Gruenhagen's district. These innovations will complement the already staggering list of industrial hemp applications that include textiles, biocomposite plastics, feedstocks, food applications, construction materials like insulation and hempcrete, solvents, paint additives, carpeting, livestock bedding, and many more. In fact, many automobile manufacturers currently use hemp composite materials in car interiors and door panels. New cutting-edge applications are being developed such as electric car batteries made with hemp nanosheets, and there's been a handout that's on your desk regarding that as well. Law enforcement will say that hemp is industrial hemp marijuana, and I'm going to just say, if there's any law enforcement opposition, that no. Even though they both come from the cannabis sativa, the varieties that are used to make industrial hemp products, seeds, fiber, etc., and those that are used to make marijuana, flowering tops and leaves, are distinctively different. They are scientifically different and cultivated in very many different ways. Hemp is defined as having less than a 0.3% THC. Can smoking industrial hemp get a person high? I am as anti-drug as most of you in here. The reality of THC levels in industrial hemp is so low that no one could get high from smoking it. Moreover, hemp contains a relatively high percentage of another cannabinoid, CBD, that actually blocks the marijuana high. Hemp, it turns out, is not only not marijuana, it could be called anti-marijuana. And for any concerns, are there going to be marijuana growers that hide their marijuana plants in hemp fields? That absolutely would not happen, because it would render both crops useless, and marijuana growers do not want their product anywhere near a hemp field. Myth, even though THC levels are low in hemp, the THC can be extracted and concentrated to produce a powerful drug. The reality is extracting THC from industrial hemp and further refining it to eliminate the preponderance of CBD would require such an expensive, hazardous, and time-consuming process that it is extremely unlikely anyone ever would attempt it, rather than simply obtaining high THC marijuana instead. And I touched on the hemp fields would be used to hide marijuana, but hemp is also grown quite differently from marijuana. Moreover, it is harvested during different times than marijuana. Cross-pollination between hemp plants and marijuana plants would significantly reduce the potency of marijuana plant. And that, Mr. Speaker, I conclude.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, first of all, I'd like to ask for a roll call on the amendment.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Mr. Speaker and members, I have no idea where the vote is going to go on this, actually. I just want to give you the law enforcement side. The Sheriff's Association, Chiefs Association, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers all oppose, and I'll give you some of the reasons. First of all, they have a real problem with the significant, even though they say it's grown differently, it still smells the same, looks the same in most characteristics. and you can't tell it apart. They're going to have problems with the canine dogs distinguishing the difference between it. They're going to be almost useless. The drug recognition kits for marijuana won't work on the hemp, so if they find somebody with hemp, it looks like marijuana. There's not going to be a way to distinguish it. DPS supposedly gave not an okay, but they said that the fiscal note was taken away because they don't, the way it was written, they don't have to come under an expense. The expense is going to come, however, from all the local governments that send in the indistinguishable material to find out what it is. They're going to have to pay for it. So there is a significant local impact, I think. And I just feel like no country left for old men in this situation. You know, they accuse cops of being paranoid. We passed the medical marijuana thing, even I voted for it, and thinking that it wouldn't go any further, but right away they come back the next year and it's going to be after recreational. I think we all know where that's going to end up. I think we know where this is headed, even though they talk about research right now, and research farm and research projects. Eventually, it's going to go wide scale. And it's just going to make a real problem for law enforcement. DPS didn't do that hot a job actually on the leadership of this thing and getting people together. But the other three law enforcement agencies do oppose it. I think there's even a problem with, everybody's been telling me the reason it's such a good deal is because you can't plant marijuana and hemp near each other, because hemp destroys the marijuana or really makes problems. So I don't know what the medical marijuana people are going to do, how they're going to deal with this, if any of the hemp is planted next to medical marijuana, if that's going to wreck that. And there's just a myriad of problems with this. Another one that they have brought up is that there's no local opt-in or opt-out. In other words, if you live in Keystra, Minnesota, or Wells, or somewhere there, and the commissioner gives a permit to grow this stuff, the local law enforcement, the local community doesn't have the opt-in or out or rules like 70-20 like they do feedlot operations, and have some say or a process where the local government can opt in or out. So vote how you wish. I just wanted to tell you how law enforcement, naturally I'm going to vote against it after a lifetime of fighting this surge, and so vote how you wish. Thank you very much.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To answer a couple of those things that were brought up just now, the initial fields would have to be approved, they'd be tracked, people would know where they are, so it's not a question of, this amendment would not allow people to just start growing hemp wherever they wanted to. That is not part of this amendment. This amendment would allow it to be grown under controlled conditions, permitted conditions. It's not going to be in the backyard. It's not going to be up behind the high school. The question of whether the testing kits are going to work or not, if they're testing for THC, they'll find THC. That's what we ought to be testing for. Hemp fiber products are already legal. You can go and buy a shirt and so on, but they have to be imported from somewhere else. And currently, if the U.S. manufacturers are importing their supply from Canada or from Europe, not from here. The economic reality of this is that Minnesota used to be a leading producer of hemp in the United States. It's a profitable crop. And we used to lead the nation. So we know it can grow here. They are growing it in Manitoba. The question about the ruining both crops, because the two crops are related, they can cross-pollinate. So this is kind of like, one year my kids in science class grew marigolds and then brought them home to Mom for Mother's Day. And one of the kids had a yellow marigold and the other one had one of those kind of reddish-orange marigolds. And I planted them at opposite ends of a planter box that I had. And the next year, I had kind of stripy red and orange ones in the middle, because they had cross-pollinated with each other. And the point of this with respect to industrial hemp versus marijuana is that neither party wants to get a hybrid. Because if somebody wants to illicitly grow marijuana, they don't want to get bad marijuana, crummy marijuana that they can't sell, illegally though it may be, at as much profit as if they had good stuff somewhere else. And the hemp producer's not going to want to allow that either, because the hemp varieties that you're going to plant are going to be optimized either for fiber production or for seed production. This is kind of like the difference between the related potato and tomato plants. One of them is optimized for fruit production, that's the tomato, and the other one's optimized for those funny lumpy things that grow down in the roots, that's the potato. If you hybridize that, you'd get something that wasn't very good at either of those. One of the reasons hemp is profitable is because there are a lot of different potential uses. Even the stuff that's optimized for seed production produces valuable fiber in the stalks, and industrial hemp grows really tall. And one of the consequences of that is you get relatively long fibers in it. That's what's good for all the composites and that kind of stuff. If you're using the variety that's good for fiber, this is what we used to use for many, 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 many different textile uses. Hemp rope is some of the best rope there is, because not only is it strong, but it's also naturally rot resistant, but it has a better hand than synthetic ropes do, and holds a knot better. Similarly, hemp textiles, cloth that you make out of hemp, it's naturally rot resistant, but otherwise performs in many of the ways that linen and cotton do. But industrial hemp has a couple of really big advantages over cotton as a crop. It doesn't need pesticides. And so it can be a profitable, environmentally friendly crop. In parts of Minnesota, we could reduce pesticide use. You can hold water on the land because it puts down good roots, and so on. So it's an attractive crop from that point of view. When they started growing industrial hemp in Manitoba, there were people that thought that, well, because they heard it's related to marijuana, that this would be good stuff. And one of the issues that they had was that people would come in and steal part of their crop, and then they quickly found out it wasn't good for what they thought it was good for, so they didn't do that. So I hope we can get over the objections and vote for this. It'd be good for Minnesota's farmers. Thanks.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Representative Franson for bringing this bill, and we had a good hearing. It was very informative. I support this bill because I come from a district where I think probably more people wear hemp than any other district in the state, and really there is no reason here to get into how we refer to here the weeds, because this amendment it basically provides an alternative to sweeping legislation. I mean, we do this all the time here. If you probably count the bills, I'm sure it's approaching, maybe 50 where we propose that we study something, or we form a task force, or we defer it. And so this amendment, it simply permits further study. It'll give us more time to address the issues that Representative Cornish and law enforcement concerns. And really, when you think about where at least in the last 15 years, there's been a renewed interest for industrial hemp, and the infrastructure, the production, processing, all of that would enable this to be done on a large scale. None of that has materialized in the last 15 years. And so this would give us more time to address law enforcement concerns regarding how it's going to be monitored, how it's going to be registered, and all the security concerns. All of that is, like, I would say at least 15 years down, 15 years away. What this amendment does is simply is it certifies and registers certain sites. Either they can be registered with a higher institution of learning, and then they have to, the State Department of Agriculture would be authorized to implement regulations to carry out these pilot programs. So it really is just a study, and we need to know more about the growth, about how to harvest it, whether it's even profitable. The marketing and the how many jobs it'll create, what it'll yield, how much land it will take, all those issues require further study. So I support this amendment. Please vote green.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
I'll just thank Representative Khan for bringing this amendment and Representative Franson for the bill. She shared lots of good products that could be made from this, and I think farmers do need more diversity in the crops that they choose. But enough has been said, and I'll leave it at that.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, we were working on another issue. Mr. Speaker and members, I think this is a good amendment, and I think that we should be taking a look at this, not as something, and I respect Representative Cornish's views and others' views on this, but why not give our agricultural community the opportunity to test something that might very well work out to be a great thing? We don't know for sure what it's going to do, but other states are starting to do it. We're doing it in a very limited capacity. I think there are a lot of potential uses for this, and I think it's worth taking a shot at it. I would appreciate, or I would encourage members to vote yes on the Khan amendment. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Khan yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Pepin.
Thank you. Representative Khan, I'm generally supportive of your amendment. However, I do not like Section 38, the findings section, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to, if we passed it today, if you'd be willing to take that section out in conference committee.
Representative Khan.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Pepin, I don't think it will be any trouble taking it out in conference committee. The Senate hates findings.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Khan and Representative Franson. I appreciate that, and will support your amendment today.
Any further discussion on the Khan amendment? Representative Khan.
Just two sentences in answer to Representative Cornish. The first thing you do is look at sections 40 through sections 43 and look at the amount of registration and regulation that's required. The last thing someone doing an illegal act wants to do is give a GPS of where they're doing it to the regulators. The final one sentence thing to do is just remember Canada is many years ahead of us. If you want to talk to a law enforcement group that knows something about this, give a call to the Royal Mounted Police in Canada, and they'll tell you that their job their difficulties with marijuana went way, way down once industrial hemp came in on the scene.
Representative Cornish.
Members, I didn't get all emotional about this or sensationalize it or say terrible things were going to happen, and just wanted you to know that. And then the other thing is that this came to the Public Safety Committee after deadline. So I didn't want to seem like I was a big bad guy here that was afraid of the bill or didn't want to hear it. It came after deadline, and I received no request to send it to Rules and make the deadline. So I did get a request for a hearing, but it came to me after deadline.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I simply want to say thank you for the thoughtful debate. I've been a strong supporter of this ever since I was first elected. Like Representative Cornish had said, I understand what the issues are around this as well. And so, again, I guess my advice would be just leave it up to each and every one of you, obviously, on how you'd like to vote. Representative Hoppe, thank you for your support as well. It was wonderful to hear your words, too. And again, I've been a strong supporter all along. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 89 ayes and 37 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bly moves to amend House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded RA 15-037.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you. This amendment would change the name of the research board from advisory board and then just call it a pass-through fund.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Thank you, Speaker.
Bly moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A50.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to begin by just explaining the amendment. What the amendment does is take out the recommended Ag Board and allow for the funds to flow through to the Ag Commissioner to the University of Minnesota and the Rapid Response Fund to go to the Board of Animal Health. And I want to speak carefully about this. I know this is an issue that's very important to Chair Hamilton, and you've been a good chair, Chair Hamilton, and I respect you and your opinion. And I also appreciate your willingness to let me voice my concerns, and you've done that in the past, and I hope you'll take this amendment in that context, that my goal is to express my, my concerns. And in the Ag Committee, I find myself many times a minority voice, but I want folks to understand that I am speaking for farmers that have approached me and talked with me about this. So it's not an anti-ag position, but it does represent a certain voice. I agree with the intent of this section of the bill that would increase funding to the University for Ag Research. I think it's important. I think we need to do that. I'm concerned about this board deciding on ag production research because my sense is that board members will primarily look to protect their own interests by majority, as opposed to looking at the big picture. It's not just that there's an issue, at least for me, with whether or not the board is advisory, and there's been some concern about that, and Representative Hamilton has made efforts to address that, and I compliment him on his efforts to try to speak to concerns. I have concerns about the general way that we look at production research, and over the years how the university has been influenced to pursue research at the interest of the major and mostly moneyed groups in agriculture, who would sit on such a board even if it were advisory. I fear those groups may have too much influence so that the type of research and the framing of the research does not give us the kind of big picture answers I think we need in agriculture. Perhaps that's beginning to change, but the history I've witnessed would suggest something different. Take, for example, the recent research completed by the milk producers and the university that resulted in a summit earlier this year called Stronger Together. It claimed to represent the future of all dairy. Professor Bosick, the professor hired by the two groups to do the research, said that his research to determine the future of dairy production suggested that the optimum size of a dairy is 2,000 cows. This followed, though not related to, a controversial decision on the part of the MPCA Citizens Board to overrule the MPCA and ask for an environmental impact study for a 9,000 cow dairy. The proposed dairy would have been owned by an Iowa firm and managed by Minnesota farmers. The Iowa developer decided that the EIS would slow his progress too much and moved his dairy proposal to South Dakota. The Citizens Board based its decisions on testimony from neighbors who had concerns about the impact on them and the fact that the developer had not secured all of the contracts for the massive amounts of manure that would be produced. When I asked Professor Bosick in committee about his research as it relates to economic growth in greater Minnesota, if he considered that it might be advantageous to rural Minnesota to have more farmers with those cows. Instead of 10 farms with 2,000 cows each, why not 100 farms with 200 cows? Since the development of industrial farming, we have seen fewer and fewer farmers. Without enough people, schools are closed or consolidated, services are discontinued, and commerce suffers for lack of customers. His response was that those were socioeconomic questions which his study did not really consider. But his message reminded me of what we heard in the 1980s. Farmers were told, get big or get out. In addition, in ag committees, we heard bills attempting to exempt industrial farmers from nuisance suits from their neighbors. To be clear, these are not suits that are a nuisance, but suits that claim the production practices are a nuisance to the neighbors. Smaller livestock productions are exempt in certain cases when they spread manure, etc. And these large livestock operations, sometimes called confined animal farming operations, CAFOs, do produce gases that can be potentially dangerous to health and in some cases lethal. When questions were asked about removing legal rights of neighbors, some commented that with this exemption, this would be the end, without this exemption, the end of livestock production in Minnesota. But not all livestock production are CAFOs. In fact, according to the University of Minnesota, there are 3,808 dairy farms in our state, and only 76, that's 2%, of them are even larger than 500 cows. As a state legislator representing rural Minnesota, I believe that it's important we articulate a future for rural Minnesota that includes a place for small and medium-sized family farms. Indeed, I think a key to a vibrant rural Minnesota is creating policies that support and encourage more small and medium-sized family farmers to get started. These operations are the types of small businesses that spend money on Main Street, that can help attract young people back to rural Minnesota. I don't know that a board looking at production research is going to consider the bigger picture. In addition, with environmental risks we face with our drinking water, I'm not satisfied even with one chair on the board being given to an environmental group appointed by the Commissioner of Agriculture, if the result will take into account the big picture of what best practices and production ought to look like. What we have seen is that big groups with lots of money tend to want to protect the kind of production that continues to make them highly profitable. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making a profit, but as Adam Smith would say, he is certainly not a good citizen who does not wish to promote by every means in his power the welfare of the whole society of his fellow citizens. One of the farmers testifying against the nuisance exemption said he believed if he were doing something wrong or that was found to adversely affect his neighbors, they should have the right to stop him. I don't mean to suggest that the university or the Department of Ag always gets it right, but having the possibility of the public weighing in through the legislative process, as in the Ag Special, there can be feedback to them. I trust that our great University of Minnesota will lead us in the right directions, but only if they hear from all of us through the legislative process. We need to preserve and enhance that process of broad citizen input into agricultural research and funding priorities. We should not further limit the citizen voice by establishing boards ruled by special interests. I also have concerns about having the rapid response funds pass through a board when it needs to get as quickly as possible to the Board of Animal Health. I would be remiss in not saying that over the years I've attempted to advance organic farming research or practices that take into account the changing world we live in. I've often met with resistance. I imagine a board of this kind would find it even more difficult to take into account the interests of what are currently minority or less well-funded entities. For this reason, I would move that we remove the board and establish the fund for increased research to go to university and have Rapid Response Fund go to the Board of Animal Health. And I'd like a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the Bly A50 amendment. Representative McNamara.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got a personal policy of never standing up in the middle of when somebody's speaking, but this one really challenged me to abide by my personal convictions. Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order to 3.21. Amendments to the amendments must be germane to the underlying amendment. The underlying amendment, though it was not about the Citizens Board and all that, it was actually about deleting the words advisory board and changing it to a pass-through fund. Representative Bly, when he first began to talked about his amendment to the amendment and talked about how it's interjecting a whole new subject to this amendment. It's transferring funds, it's using money for the Board of Regents. Mr. Speaker, this is not germane to the underlying amendment. I'd ask you to rule it not germane.
Representative McNamara rises to a point of order under Rule 3.21. Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
I did make comments about the Citizens Board inadvertently to describe my concerns about the board itself. I don't believe that in my amendment that's the purpose. You know, I think we do allow for some talking about things. I mean, I'm trying to build a case for why I think the amendment is important and should be considered. I would advise that you find this motion not well taken.
Thank you, members. On the point of order, having reviewed the amendment to the amendment, and the actual bill, I find the point of order well taken. Members, we're now back on the Bly amendment, the coded RA 15-037. Discussion to that amendment. Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Bly. You know, when we first initially put this bill together, this board was a voting board. They were going to vote, and the majority on however they decided that's how the funds would be allocated. We took in consideration as far as members from this chamber, on both sides of this chamber that had concerns with that, outside of this chamber. And we made the adjustments. This is an advisory board. We also added, after taking into consideration what some of the concerns were, On lines 29.30, we added representatives from organic and sustainable agriculture. On lines 31 of the same page, a person representing statewide environmental and natural resources conservation organizations. We also added forest products or individuals that represent the forest industry. So our whole goal is, like I've said many, many times, I want it all. And we want to bring everybody to the table and bring everybody together as it pertains to agriculture. When these dollars are going to be invested in research, this is productivity research. And through the land-grant universities, through our college system, these are findings that everybody have access to. And whatever your methodology is as far as your production practices, whether it's traditional or conventional, organic, whatever the case may be, you will have access to these research findings. And so we have tried extremely hard. No, we did reach across, try to build the bridges, bring everybody together, and visiting with the nonpartisan staff, they said the changes that we made in the Ways and Means Committee did accomplish what it is as far as the intent. And I'll say it on record as well. The intent is for this board to be advisory. And then subsequently, after they take, they, being the Commissioner of Agriculture, takes under advisement the information brought forward, the Commissioner then will make the decision on how these dollars will be spent and allocated. So, Representative Bly, you know, we've been going very, very well and holding hands and singing all along, right? But I'm going to speak against this amendment. And you stated in your opening comments, we've had these conversations. I feel like we've come a long, long way trying to find common ground here. And so I ask members to please vote no on the Bly amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion on the Bly amendment? The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I think the Bly amendment as it is now is really just changing the title to a transfer, which would have been appropriate under the amendment that was ruled out of order. I think the issue, and we can debate when it comes up in the next series of amendments, there's actually an opportunity to clarify intent in a subsequent amendment. So I would encourage moving through this amendment and getting to the next one, and maybe we can have that discussion.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
I'll withdraw this amendment.
Representative Bly withdraws the amendment coded RA 15-037. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bly moves to amend House Bill number 1437, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A42.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to explain your amendment.
A42, you said? Thank you, Speaker. This amendment would allocate some money. We know that the avian flu issue is going to be with us for a number of years. And so my concern is that we make sure that we are applying research that tries to get to the bottom of the cause, the susceptibility of the animals, and the prevention of a future event like this. So that's the intent of my amendment here.
Discussion of the Bly amendment. The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. Representative Bly, my argument initially was they can do this anyway within the language set forth. However, in the spirit of compromise, because I'm going to speak against your next amendment, in the spirit of compromise, I'm going to ask members to support this amendment.
Any further discussion on the Bly amendment, A42? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Bly amendment A42 signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bly moves to amend House Bill number 1437, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A41.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Speaker. And as Chair Hamilton has mentioned, that there's some, and also Representative Hansen mentioned, there's some confusion or some uncertainty about whether or not the language does describe an advisory board. And my amendment here tries to make that more clear. And so the issue has to do with the boards passing on their report to the Commissioner of Agriculture. And in the current language it says the Commissioner shall determine, which some feel is simply a pass-through, that the Commissioner will do what the board tells him to do. And so what I'm doing is changing that to say that the Commissioner may allow. So that's the gist of it. Just to clarify whether or not it is advisory and whether or not the Commissioner has the power to determine or not.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I already made, I guess, my thoughts known on this on the earlier amendments. You've heard my arguments. Like I said, nonpartisan staff weighed in on this as well. And the author of the bill, the intentions, like I said, have been stated and clarified that this is an advisory board. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask people vote against this amendment.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
I'll ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the Bly amendment, the A41 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 45 ayes and 82 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 1437, as amended.
Third reading. Further discussion to House File 1437 as amended. Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this bill from Representative Rod, I Want It All Hamilton, he actually got a great deal. So I appreciate that although we may have some policy differences, we may have some yet items to discuss, I think that certainly there are a number of things that, members on this side of the aisle can appreciate in this bill. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention is the word of the day is responsive. And I would state that Representative Hamilton has been responsive to the requests by the DFL legislators, the bills that were heard in his committee, the discussions that we had, the inclusion of some of our bills within the Ag Finance Bill, and much like the responsiveness that we've seen by our departments and by the governor with regards to the avian flu, I think that we've also seen that from Representative Hamilton, and I appreciate that. This is a bill that very typically is fairly bipartisan, and that is likely to again be the case. I know that there are others that may have some concerns yet about certain aspects of this bill, but I do believe that there's a lot of agreement. And one thing that I wanted to mention that really hasn't gotten a lot of discussion is the bioeconomy production incentive, and that's a really good thing for a lot of people, no matter if you're in the metropolitan area or in greater Minnesota, rural Minnesota. You can appreciate bringing more economic diversity to our state and allowing for green chemical companies and other bioeconomy companies to be settling in Minnesota and growing in Minnesota. So I thank the members of the DFL who served on the Ag Finance Committee. I think we were able to have a lot of things heard and discussed, and I appreciate Representative Hamilton and the ability to be able to have a congenial and collegial relationship throughout this process. So Representative Rod Hamilton, certainly you want it all, and I think you nearly got it all. So thank you.
Further discussion to the bill. The member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. And I too want to say thanks to Chair Hamilton for doing a great job running his committee this year. His door was always open to advice from our side of the aisle and the other side, and we all appreciate that a great deal. So thank you much for the work on this bill. And this bill usually is one of the first ones through the process here, but again, because of the influenza situation, Chair Hamilton waited and got the numbers correctly and got advice and financial numbers from the Department of Ag, Board of Animal Health, and got it right. With the help of other members of the committee and such, this bill is a great example of patience and getting things right and doing a good job and getting it done. I would just like to add something I read in a farm paper over the weekend that shows the importance of agriculture to the state of Minnesota, and especially to those of us who live in greater Minnesota. It says that agriculture is what primes the economic pump for all of us in greater Minnesota, and this bill goes a long ways in keeping that pump going, keeping the economy strong for us in rural areas. We have some challenges, no doubt about it, but thanks to great work like this, it'll help us meet those challenges and get the job done. So I support the bill and encourage a green vote on the Ag Finance Bill. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. First of all, Chair Hamilton, thank you very much for your excellent leadership. Members in the Ag Committee, thank you very much for working. It's been an excellent session talking about and working with all of the challenges with agriculture. Chair Anderson, thank you for working with you. Wonderful to work with you also. Members, I wanted to point out that agriculture is an important role in Minnesota. It plays as a job provider and a food provider. Something that all of us need in order to sustain life. There is a lot of great educational value in what we're promoting, both with our young people in education and also with our young farmers as we strive to promote the farm business management that many of you in the rural heard concerns about. We'll be able to sustain that and help young farmers that start out farming, whether they be in a very rural area or in a minority population. An important tool that we use in Minnesota, they put out farm business management information every year that is used by not only our farmers, but also used by our state as numbers come in for different agricultural products. Minnesota families, our farm families are proud to be able to feed not only Minnesotans, but all of, as you've heard from the concerns with the avian flu, how important agriculture is to rural Minnesota and really Minnesota in general. One thing, members, I want you to remember when you think about agriculture is it is not only affecting rural Minnesota, but it also affects the metropolitan area. It is where we bring a lot of products to be processed and sold, and a lot of marketing is done within the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and very important to the industry also. So in Minnesota, agriculture, as you probably heard me say before, is the second largest industry in Minnesota, and I believe that helped us to sustain our economy in a time when things were pretty tough in most of the United States. With that, thank you very much, members, and that's it.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. And I'll extend my thanks again to Chair Hamilton for his willingness to hear my sometimes different point of view and different perspective, and the way that he conducted the committee and brought this bill forward. I do have some comments, though, that I want to share with the floor, with the body. I want to start my comments with something one of our young future farmer leaders said when he, from my district, said when he was here visiting the Capitol. He said, you know, there's good and bad in everything. Many of the changes in agriculture over the last few years have been praised as advances and improvements, but when we look at the big picture, we also see a shadow with those changes. Industrial agriculture, which is a part of our agriculture, has pushed many small and medium-sized farmers out of farming. Last year, 400 small farms were lost. Our streams, lakes, and waterways are filling up with chemicals and sediment. People are leaving the land, and farming is becoming more and more dangerous. We hear more and more about letting our policy be guided by science, but science is multifaceted and dependent on asking the right questions with the right perspective. I'm willing to accept that my ideas can have a downside to the things I support, and I think the best side of the democratic process helps us with that concern. We work things out in committee and on the floor. We must work together to get it right. But although there have been overtures and there have been talk about reaching out to our side in an effort to try to show that we want it all, I've not seen that it's always inclusive, nor can it be. And I'm going to talk about some of my concerns, some of which I've mentioned, and about what was left out of this bill, why I think that might have been the case. I don't want to fault Chair Hamilton, as for the most part he's been encouraging all sides to put their bills forward. However, as I've experienced in the past, many of my ideas for advancing what I would call the big picture in agriculture don't get a hearing. I've introduced bills that would eliminate certain chemicals that are harmful to pollinators. We know without pollinators there are many plants we depend on that can't produce the food we rely on. Caring for pollinators provides a context for the big picture, recognizing the need for diversity and the role nature plays in making the systems of nature work. I've introduced bills to educate young and beginning farmers in new ways and provide them with financial assistance. Also bills to train college students interested in learning about organic and sustainable farming. It seems to me that for some reason, bills promoting organic and sustainable practices are a threat to conventional ag, and it would seem my proposals are undermined or pushed aside. I've introduced bills promoting organics and organic production to meet the growing demand for organic products. We are now having to import organic corn from places like Romania to meet the demand for organic chickens. The last few sessions, I've introduced bills that would establish a food council for talking about health, food production, and the environment all at once, so we could look at the big picture. The Commissioner of Public Health released a study explaining that our health and the cost of health care are related to the environment we live in and the hazards around us in both rural and urban Minnesota. From cancer to obesity and diabetes to asthma and autism, we are making ourselves sick. But it seems that it is a discussion that we don't really want to have. I do want to acknowledge that there are a few things in this bill which do show Chair Hamilton's willingness to hear and include some of our ideas, although without funding them. You'll find mention of Forever Green, an initiative I introduced several years ago that funds University of Minnesota research on perennials and cover crops that can be money makers for farmers, at the same time protecting the soil and water. We heard excellent testimony in committee from brilliant young researchers who described their work to use plants instead of chemicals to protect the soil and increase yields. There is a biofuels bill here which looks to encourage cellulosic ethanol production from non-corn organic material in addition to corn stover, and I thank Representative Hamilton for expanding the bill to include that. Before the start of the 2015 session, I attended an Outstate Legislators Forum in Mankato. The Land magazine covered the forum, but made no mention of my being there. Other legislators talked about the need for focus on Greater Minnesota and attracting farming ventures to Minnesota. The conversation moved quickly to the MPCA and Citizen Board decision on the 9,000 cow dairy. Several complained about the long process of approving startups, including a mining operation in northern Minnesota. But Representative Clark Johnson said, we need to get it right, even if it takes a while, and commented how important it was to protect our water. We can't rush through the questions about practices that cast a dark shadow on our environment. Senator Rosen was insistent that the loss of the huge dairy would cost thousands of jobs, and in earlier press statements had alleged that farmers who requested the EIS on the proposed big dairy and managed a 3,000 cow diversified dairy themselves could not be called real ag. I wrote a letter indicating my surprise at this allegation and stood up on behalf of small and middle-sized family farms. My letter resulted in a good number of those farmers calling my office, thanking me and wanting me to tell their stories. One farmer talked about how difficult it was to compete with huge farms, but sad to see what they did to the landscape. He wanted me to know how what was efficient for the corporations was not necessarily efficient for the farmer. Another wanted to talk about buffers and how to make them work and the problems tiling caused because the landscape wasn't suited for corn and soy. He said farmers needed to know how to work with their land, and each landscape was different. Another said he wished we'd never gotten started with all these chemicals. There's really no need for it. I can get just as good a yield with my organic corn as any of them, and they're killing their soil. I remembered a farmer showing me the difference between chemically treated soil and organic soil. The nitrated soil blew away like dust. The organic soil was loose but moist and clumped with organic material. These farmers don't like the Farm Bill because it incentivizes, not this bill, but the federal Farm Bill, because it incentivizes conventional corn, soy, and cotton, and offers no protection to farmers who farm organically or intersperse their crops with cover crops. Another farmer in his 80s said he made a good living on a small, diversified farm with 40 hogs, put his kids through college. A small livestock producer can make it because they don't have all the debt and can take care of the land more responsibly. These giant farms lock you into debt and allow others to take your freedom away from you. It was a mistake for the government to encourage them and to let corporations own farms and own seeds. Another farmer said the reason North American farmers avoided troubles of political turmoil of South America is because we have had smaller, independent farmers, farmer-owned operations, as opposed to big plantations, which were another age's factory farm. My first teaching job was in western Minnesota, in farm country, and farmers were eager to show off their land and were proud of the work they did, and quick to learn from each other. Not all were happy with the ways they were being encouraged to change their farms. Many liked a mix of things, but were willing to try something different. Sugar beets were becoming popular, and a new farmer-owned processing plant had come in, but other farmers were not so quick to change. Years later, I found myself walking on the organic dairy owned by Dave Minar. Dave explained how the birds, the bugs, the manure, the soil, and the grasses and the cows all interacted and worked together, improving the pasture. Dave said he used to be a conventional farmer using chemicals on his farm, but the chemicals made him sick, so he quit and has learned a lot about how nature and its delicate balances can take care of so many problems. Most of us have no knowledge of how the delicate balance of microorganisms work all around us. Without them, we couldn't digest our food. Babies are born with healthy microbes that their mothers shared with them. Scientists who study these things speculate that although we may have 10 trillion human cells in our bodies, we are home to 100 trillion microbes. We have 20,000 genes and 2 to 20 million microbial genes. Most helpful, some potentially could turn on us. This is what makes chemicals, antibiotics, and pesticides so dangerous. We don't know what they are destroying. We don't know the long-term effects. Not only does the big machinery combined with chemicals allow one farmer to farm more acres, but it kills microbes and bugs in the soil. They are clearing the landscape. And as these farm practices and farm work are changed by industrial agriculture, but also how farm life and the enjoyment of farm life has changed over the years. Fewer and fewer people means shrinking towns and closing schools and the loss of a creative society that supported that way of life. Farming is no longer safe for young people. We need sustainable farms and sustainable farming. Farming that does not spoil the water or deplete the soil or deplete human beings. Several bills before the Minnesota House this year have a certain bent to them, which to an onlooker may well have the result of further clearing the landscape of family farmers. Efforts to protect industrial agriculture from having to adjust to the needs of their neighbors, removing of protections for pollinators because they implicated chemical companies. Civilizations started with agriculture, but as we look at many of the first civilizations, they were ravaged not by invading forces, but by overuse and misuse of the soil, a lack of understanding how to repair and regenerate the soil. Soil scientists warn us that we have about 60 years left of good topsoil if we don't do something about soil loss through erosion. Starting in the 70s, farmers have been encouraged to grow as much as they could, ignore surpluses, and focus on selling in the world market. Then they were encouraged to specialize and get bigger. They were encouraged more and more to give control of their farms to the chemical and equipment dealers, signing up with big distributors and committing themselves to overwhelming debt, which in a time of falling prices and an economic downturn becomes unsustainable. Reducing chemical use across the board means reducing the impact of big money on agriculture. Much of federal ag policy is heavily influenced by corporate interests and not in the interests of farmers. Prior to World War II, there were few farmers that farmed with chemicals, and they could be successful. However, after World War II and the beginning of chemical weapons, chemical companies needed to find new uses for their chemicals. They looked to agriculture as a new market for their products. It wasn't until Rachel Carson described what was happening to birds that things began to change. Every step of the way, the rich chemical companies fight at every turn to undo or weaken government controls, claiming that these are industry-tested chemicals that do not harm people. Government agencies and government policies that should protect us are constantly undermined by the powerful chemical industries. I recently read a book, Poison Spring, by former EPA official E.G. Villantios, explaining how powerful the chemical industries are, blocking the EPA at every turn from enforcing or investigating violations of our environmental laws. Departments in the 70s did little more than defend industry, even more blatantly than they do today. President Nixon responded in 1970. He said, "The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water? Clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American, Nixon said. Today, although progress has been made, we remain under the control of the chemical and corporate lobbies that control government policy and hold farmers hostage. The chemical industry has wined and dined farmers over the years, convincing them of easier management and greater yields, and being able to patent seeds to further restrict the independence of individual farmers. We are, however, learning from independent science more and more about how nature works. The Genome Project and the Epigenome Project teach us that nature interacts and communicates in ways that if we learn to listen and observe, we can make peace with nature and put away our destructive chemical weapons and learn to grow all the food we need to survive, and at the same time preserve our soil and our clean air and water. Science, when separated from the big picture, gives us false answers, often shaped by influence and moneyed interests. But science that is integrated with the way nature evolves and the cycles it observes can be used to provide us with food we need and maintain our environment. Supporting farmers in Minnesota is a bipartisan issue, and Chair Hamilton has borne that out this year. We often hear how we support all kinds of agriculture, and I agree, we should. Whether Republicans or Democrats control the ag committees, we've been united in our goal to make sure farmers in Minnesota thrive. However, just like you can't fit everything you might want to eat on your plate at the smorgasbord, sometimes you have to make choices about what you put on your plate or what kind of farming we support on the land. We have seen policies at both state and federal levels that try to address concerns about making sure farmers can continue to provide us food we need. I'm concerned about what appears to be a disturbing trend, dividing farmers and legislators alike. We're told that in order to help farmers succeed, we should support, in quotes, real farmers. And real farmers are farmers that operate bigger and bigger farms. Over the history of farming, we've seen times when farms have gotten big and then gotten small, depending on conditions. But getting bigger is frequently described as a trend that makes economic sense. But economic sense for whom? That's a question that rarely gets asked. Farmers of all sizes I talk to have different opinions. It's my sense those who manage to remain small have fewer risks and are more likely to weather like the wheat stalks that bend with the winds of change. They also appear to me to be able to be closer to the land and more sensitive to how it is used and how use affects their neighbors and the environment. Processors of farm products tend to like dealing with bigger farms and influence policies to make it harder for smaller operations to survive. But we see this trend means fewer people on the land and fewer customers supporting rural economies. It makes me concerned about how we best grow economic development in greater Minnesota. The recent pattern we've seen in the agriculture committees has been unsettling to me. We're encouraging the creation of ever larger industrial-scale operations that may offend their neighbors and aren't going to have the added public benefits of clean and healthy air, water, and soil we see when we encourage smaller farming practices. The future of farming in Minnesota shouldn't be one where we have fewer and fewer farmers acting as stewards of the land. It's a simple notion, but encouraging more farmers is better for everyone by improving our economy and our environment. I have no illusions that my statement here will change our current practices, though it concerns me that more attention is not given to risks we take by continuing them. It is my intent here to give voice to farmers who rarely have a voice, yet contribute to agriculture and our well-being as a state and a nation. Finally, I'm concerned that we not hold up avian flu provisions in the Omnibus bill and would like to see them move in a standalone bill. Thank you.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, well, I saw Representative Pulowski's pulled out his notebook here, so I'm going to keep it short and say, Representative Hamilton, thank you. It was a pleasure to work with you on the committee. I appreciate your inclusion of my bill and look forward to watching the conference committee go and urge a green vote.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hamilton and Representative Poppy. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years that we have been here doing this, and we've been through several ag bills, and I think the conversation is similar every time we do it. I think for perspective, members, if we look at our surrounding states, the Iowa Department of Agriculture is the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. If we look at Wisconsin, I think the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture is the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. And really, the bill that we have here and the Ag Department does affect trade, consumer protection, land stewardship, all of those things. We just don't put it in the name of the bill. We modify and we tweak and we change the appropriations each year, but in general, most of the appropriations continue. And depending on the interests, are added to. We spent some time earlier today about the Ag Transfer Board. And really, if we look at the past few years, the Ag Transfer Board results out of cuts to ag research that used to be funded through the ag specials, through the higher education budget. There's been a reduction over time for that research. And I think most folks want to have production research. Most folks want to have research on how to find the science to work our way out of these water quality problems or these disease problems that seem to be coming year after year. But the board still, as it's described now, is made up of the way we make many boards up. And that is of interests rather than the public. $5 million a year is a lot of money. Add that to the AURI board. Add that to the fertilizer research board. Add that to all the other boards that we prepare in every bill. And we keep moving in the same path towards providing a voice for the interests who are out in the hallway rather than the interests who are outside of the building. Representative Hamilton, as it goes through into conference, I think you heard legitimate concern here about crossing the Rubicon of funding disease loss. I think we had a conversation here, and I'm sure that conversation would continue. I would encourage you to look at the precedent that's out there that we've used before and look at the opportunity for continuing that rather than crossing into covering disease loss and making sure that some actions are risk-free. The bill we haven't talked a lot about the biofuels board, which is really a new ethanol subsidy. I think of lawn care. You may wonder, why am I thinking about lawn care? Well, as a suburban district, I've got a lot of consumers in my district, and their applications of fertilizer are about lawn care. And one of the things is when you leave the clippings on the lawn, you reduce one fertilizer application because the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium that are in the leaves clippings stay there. If you keep removing the clippings, you have to add more fertilizer to provide for that plant. The same concept applies with corn or other biomass. If you remove the clippings, if you remove the residue, you've got to compensate for those nutrients by adding more in. That's in there, folks, and I know the intent of the interests, whether they're environmental interest, ag interest, science interests, are to say that we could have a different type of ethanol program, one that would encourage more cover crops, and that's a laudable goal. But the way it's written now still provides for that same analogy where you remove the residue, you're going to have to compensate for it somewhere. that's a concern. So the concerns are several. In general, it's a fairly good bill. But there have been good bills before. And for the 2 previous years, we heard a great concern about environment and agriculture being combined in committee. Well, folks, when this bill leaves here, it's going to be in a conference committee of an environment and agriculture. An environment and agriculture conference committee. So ultimately, we are combining environment and agriculture. Ultimately, we're putting those things together just like when our side of the aisle was in control, but at a different point in time. So as we move forward this year and in past years and in future years, I think it's important to come back to the consumer. Why should a suburban member care? Why should a suburban member be talking about this? Because my constituents are the consumers. And one of the ideas in business is that the customer is always right. Representative Bly spoke eloquently about some of the changes that he sees in a need for agriculture. My point in rising today is say if we do not change or make the changes in policy, the consumers are going to make the changes in the market. The consumers are going to make the changes in the market and demand changes in how their food is produced and how their water is protected. That probably won't happen here. I have no illusion, just like Representative Bly has no illusion that there will be a change. But I think our opportunity in the future is to get ahead of the curve, to see how we can shape and guide policy to make Minnesota grow and to have a vibrant economy, happy consumers who buy Minnesota-grown products, not just for now, but for the long run. So I know this will be a bipartisan vote. Representative Hamilton, I think you still have a little bit of work to do. And so I am not going to vote for the bill right now. I hope you take the advice clearly, and when it comes back in an Ag Environment Conference report, we can support a bill.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Maybe it's because I've only been here a couple of years that I'll give you a slightly different view on this than we've heard from Representative Hansen and Representative Bly. My views are much closer to those of Representative Poppe, Representative Anderson, Representative Keel. When I look at agriculture, I grew up in Fargo, so I grew up in the Red River Valley. My family settled south of Fargo near Abercrombie in the 1870s, and that's where their farming was at the heart of my family history. And I've lived in Minnesota now for 30, 40 years, and obviously family farming is central to what I see, whether I'm in Nicollet County or if I'm up in Wadena County or in Clay County outside of Fargo. And really, I think if we're going to describe farming in Minnesota, it is the family farmer is at the center of that. Now, the family farmer has changed a lot since I was a little boy, and I'd go out to the Jordheim farm and we'd hunt ducks and we'd help with some of the chores and have a lot of Sunday conversations with the old folks speaking in Norwegian and us young folks, of course, not understanding what they were talking about. But that's not what I see necessarily as a family farm. That farm looks different than the family farm when I visit one in Blue Earth County or in Nicollet County, the counties that I now represent and have a lot of family farmers. The family farmers today are far more high production. They're larger. But one thing that I find interesting, the comment about family farmers in Minnesota is just like my Uncle Salty and his brother Eddie, they farm together, so do a heck of a lot of brothers in Nicollet County. They farm together. And maybe they have a son or two, a nephew involved. It's a little larger, but they're still fundamentally family farmers. And those family farms, I really feel, are the backbone and the base of the Minnesota economy, especially the rural economy. Although to my Metro colleagues, I would argue, and I'll argue till I'm blue in the face, that it's the base of the Metro and the rural economies. It's the base of the economy. And fundamentally, Representative Hamilton, I think you've crafted a bill, or we in the Ag Committee, I'll say we in the Ag Committee, we have crafted a bill that addresses the needs and moves those family farmers forward. It's broad, it's comprehensive, and I think it's forward-thinking. Thank you for restoring the agri-funds. We had a discussion. This is a classic bill. Minnesotans, sometimes you think it's all cut and dried, that it's all decided. Not this bill. The Omnibus Ag Bill worked its way through the committee process, worked its way through the process, even in Ways and Means Committee, where I observed the process was continually changing. As this bill grew and adapted, just as Minnesotans are asking us to work together, this is a bill where we work together. And restoring the funds for the Agri program was one example where we on the DFL side said, we need that funding, we need that funding. And thank you for providing that funding, because that funding, I'll just pick out two aspects of that, what that funding does. One is it supports new and expanding livestock operations. It helps that young person who wants to start a cow-calf operation, provides some financing to go ahead and do that. It helps the dairy farmer who wants to bring the daughter into the operation, the opportunity to expand their operation so she can join in that family farm. Livestock operations. It also provides for value-added agriculture. I represent the Mankato area. Mankato's history is built on value-added agriculture, where by processing agricultural goods, we've brought the wealth of the farm into the city. And we've added that value to the product, which adds value for the farmer, but certainly for those of us who live in the Mankato area and other cities in Minnesota who benefit from value-added agriculture, and those agri-funds help that as well. Much smaller scale than what we see in the larger plants in Mankato, but important, and some of those will grow. We know they'll grow, providing opportunities for those who don't have a farm to be part of the farm economy. The research funds are critically important. Research in agriculture for too long has been dominated by the large companies. I won't name them, but the large companies have dominated the financing for agricultural research. What we're doing in this bill is we're providing publicly funded research. And in Minnesota, that publicly funded research will support the efforts of our family farmers to improve their operations, to improve their productivity, so they can advance forward moving in the future. We heard consistently about the needs for agricultural education. It's a complex challenge. These funds will help address that. In other areas in bills that are going through, we can address that. We need to continue to pay attention to the need for agricultural education in Minnesota. But I'd like to finish by focusing on one aspect of the bill, and that is the cellulosic biofuels. And this is a case where Minnesota came together, not only us in this body, between the DFLers and the Republicans, but more importantly, among interests in Minnesota that count for a lot for Minnesotans. Those who are particularly concerned about the environment, and those who are particularly concerned about agricultural production. In the cellulosic biofuels, and Representative Hansen mentioned it, I'm far more optimistic about what's written here. Because of a spirit of compromise, it was decided that over time, half of the production of biomass, half of the biomass used for production of biofuels, using to create cellulosic biofuels, half of that will come from cover crops and perennials. That's a significant new market for cover crops and perennials, a challenge that Minnesota has been challenged to face and deliver on. And in this part of this bill, we are able to hopefully create a market that will be stable to assure that cover crops and perennials can be used. That's good for water quality. I would argue it's also good for family farmers. And what came together was the ag community and the environmental community testified in favor of that amendment, the Hamilton amendment to this bill, to make sure that could happen. And so those in Minnesota who are reading the paper and hearing the disagreements about agriculture and water and saying, how can they ever come together? First of all, I'll say, take a visit to 7 Mile Creek between St. Peter and Mankato. I've mentioned that before as a good example of where farmers and environmentalists can come together. But look at this bill, because that was a significant amendment, a significant change, a significant coming together of the efforts. We need to be timely with this bill. We need to move this bill forward, because as I just learned today, the avian flu has now reached Nicollet County with 1.1 million chickens attacked just today it was reported. It doesn't go away. It seems to be rising exponentially. But this is a bill that fundamentally, in my opinion, supports family farmers. It's a broad, comprehensive, forward-thinking bill. I'll be voting yes. I encourage my colleagues to do the same.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just also rise to say to Representative Hamilton, thank you for making something happen in this bill that has never happened in the history of the state of Minnesota, and that those two very significant words, urban farming, will now be provided in state statute. So I thank you for that, and we shouldn't underestimate what that means. I can tell you that one of the really important experiences that a lot of people that I represent and other urban legislators represent was to have the opportunity to come to the committee and talk about the vision of urban farming and talk about the practicality of urban farming and the examples of urban farming. And I know that you now know names like Project Sweetie Pie and the 24th Street Urban Farm and Little Earth Farm and a whole bunch of other farms that were talked about, Stone's Throw. Those folks came, and what I was told by some of the other committee members on the committee was that it was one of the times that they saw the most communities of color represented, and I'm really pleased that we could bring that voice. The discussion earlier about family farms was really important, and one of the things I'd say about what's happening with urban farming is that this is one of the places, one of the venues where families are coming and reestablishing the opportunity to farm, and communities, a broader understanding of families, cultural communities that have come together and said, let's work on providing good, wholesome, nutritious, fresh food in our communities. Let's not just rely on what's being produced in the rest of the state, although that's important, but there are real opportunities within our cities and our urban areas to actually grow good food that people can afford. And so some of the, I guess, more exciting opportunities were when we had some young people coming and talking about their experiences and their work to grow food, folks who talked about the fact that they had worked with children who had not seen a carrot growing before or did not know what some of these foods looked like before they came out of the ground. And I think some of the discussion and the tension that was experienced, that is experienced between organic and non-organic and all of those other issues, some of it gets worked out in the urban area too. So I'm actually hopeful for that kind of change. I guess I want to say I hope we can go a little further. We did have some funding originally in this bill for some of our urban farms, but one of the things that Representative Hamilton helped us do was to get a real clear commitment from the Department of Ag that some of the existing programs would be available to some of our urban farmers. And so that's something we're going to count on, but I do hope that we might go a little further and do what the Senate did, which was actually put some funding into it. One other really important issue that I hope will eventually come back in the bill that from the conference committee is to look at something in which, again, we started out in our urban ag bill, urban farming bill in this session, which was to try to get our cities and our other areas to make a commitment to those urban farmers to be able to stay on the land that they spend a lot of time working to create good soil, healthy soil, and so on. And there were some opportunities to do that. We haven't quite got there in this bill, but I think we can and we will, hopefully. So, Representative Hamilton, my main message is thank you so much for the advancement that we've made in this, and for that reason I'm going to be supporting the bill. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Representative Johnson, Rukavina had me convinced that mining and forest products were the bedrock of the state, and I see you're changing my mind now. He's not around to work on me for that product anymore. And I noticed that we are now running, farming into a lot of areas with the solar gardens and the urban farming. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. Representative Hamilton, will you yield, please?
He will yield. Representative Earhart.
For many years, I listened to Representative Swigum talk about his farming escapades with his two brothers. He ran a spread. They all work on it now down in near Representative Skowski's area. And one of the things that I went through this bill with a very fine-tooth comb several times trying to locate something that he had asked for many years, and I didn't find it again, but maybe I didn't. And so I want to ask you if it's in there. You know, former Representative Swingham used to talk about all of the checks that he got for subsidies and other different monies that came in because he was a farmer. And he always wished that he had a second mailbox so that none of those escaped and they didn't spill out on the ground and so forth. And I looked through here, every farming bill for a number of years, I've been looking through to see if there's been some grant of an extra mailbox for each farm or farming family so that they would continue to make certain that their checks are safe from all the subsidies and support checks that they get. Did I miss that? Is that in here now, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Hamilton.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question, please?
Representative Earhart, could you repeat the question concisely for Representative Hamilton?
Well, Representative Hamilton, what I wanted to know is you finally okayed Swingham's request for an extra mailbox for every farmer so that they can capture all the subsidies and all of the support checks that they get, because he was always worried that he might miss some or they might spill out, be stolen or something or other. I couldn't find that in here. Is it in here?
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize. I should have addressed you last time, Mr. Speaker, when I asked for clarification. Representative Earhart, you know you are my favorite Democrat ever since 2008 and everything that we went through. You do realize that, I hope. But the answer, and I'm just kidding, everybody, the answer to your question is no.
Well,
Representative Earhart.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Hamilton, I'm hoping possible in the conference committee or next year, there'll always be a farm bill, and we can always hope that Swingham's request will be granted here. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Thank you, Chair Hamilton, Chair Anderson, Vice Chair Keel, and Vice Chair Franzen for putting this pro-rural Minnesota ag bill together. This bill basically does three things that I think we all can be proud of. Protects Minnesota's food supply, it helps our rural Minnesotans and rural farmers, and it promotes economic opportunities in agriculture. Members, the avian flu outbreak, as we talked about a lot here, has decimated many Minnesota farmers who have built their livelihood on raising turkeys for decades. We found out even more today, another new report. This legislation provides about $7.5 million funding for our state to better prevent and respond to the avian influenza outbreak that has devastated Minnesota turkey flocks. It also invests in food safety so that we can make sure the food on our table is safe for our families to consume. It strengthens production research to improve yields and strengthens crops. It streamlines food safety regulations for a more efficient process. Agriculture plays a central role in Minnesota's lives, both as job providers and food providers. This legislation protects our food supply so that Minnesota families know their food is safe to eat. It aids rural Minnesotans and farmers and promotes economic opportunities in agriculture. It also provides critical funding to address the crisis of avian flu so our state can work to better prevent and respond to the avian influenza outbreak that has devastated Minnesota turkey flocks. Thank you again, Representative Hamilton, Representative Anderson. Members, please vote green.
The member from Cottonwood, the bill author, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Never has there been more opportunity in agriculture as there is today. Think about it. Everybody, and I mean everybody, depends on agriculture. There's not a person, not a business, not a government that can survive without the farmer and nourishment for their bodies. You know what? The world has to double the world's food supply in 35 short years. And if we do not do that by embracing the research and productivity in ag, the world will suffer one of two fates. We'll either have to plow up critical habitat or allow even more people in this world to starve to death. And neither one are acceptable. The late Norman E. Borlaug said, "Never think for a minute that we are going to build permanent peace in this world on empty stomachs and human misery." It won't happen, and the sooner our leaders at all levels of society reflect on that, the better. Agriculture is an honorable, noble profession. And I tell you what, I've said all along, I want it all. And whether we're talking about conventional or traditional, urban versus rural, organic versus non-organic, food versus fuel, we want it all. And we had one thing, one rule when it came to testifiers in our committee. We said we will not tear down one segment of agriculture trying to promote another. We're all in this thing together. We're all in this thing together. I want to thank everybody who served on our committee. It has been an honor. It's been an honor. Vice Chair Keel, Representative Poppy, Chair Anderson, all the members, the nonpartisan staff, Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Savory, you guys rock. Two of the best. My heartless, excuse me, you do have a heart. He's mean, he's tough. Mr. Mark Knisley, thank you. Mr. Alex Bratz. Brian, you know what, you fit the mold, my friend. Brian Perro, Nancy Conley, you're fantastic. I enjoy working with you. You know, the Commissioner of the Department of Ag and also the Board of Animal Health, working with everybody over there. And again, a shout out to Santo Cruz. You're fantastic. Members, it's been an honor. It's been a joy. Please support the bill.
Seeing no further discussion and hearing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 110 ayes and 18 nays, the bill passes as amended and its title agreed to. There being no objections, we will revert to the order of business of messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House file number 848, an act relating to the financing and operation of state government. The message is signed Joanne M. Zoff, Secretary of the Senate.
Representative
Davids moved that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 848, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House, and that the House requests that a like committee be appointed by the Senate to confer on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses.
Representative Davids, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is my motion. We're not all that far apart, but we should go to conference and work a few things out.
All those in favor of the Davids motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Wednesday, May 6, 2015, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills. House File Numbers 1066, 1036, 916, and 385. Senate File Numbers 1120 and 1265. House File Numbers 1357 and 1427, and Senate File Number 1406.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File Number 2101. Garofalo, Hoppe, Newberger, Gunther, and Norton.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions, House resolutions at the desk and online. If there are no objections, we will take action on these motions first.
Atkins moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended that Senate File Number 1215 be recalled from the Committee on Commerce and Regulatory Reform, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
Representative Atkins, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, members. This motion would suspend the rules so that we could take up Senate File 1215. This is the firefighters' bill to remove toxic chemicals from flame retardants, for which there are alternatives that are readily available in the market now. Firefighters in Minnesota and across the country suffer rates of cancer at a 62% higher rate, specifically esophageal cancers, but other cancers as well, at a 62% higher rate because they take in these sorts of chemicals. Children's bodies hold 5 times as much of these chemicals as adults do. The bill passed the HHS committee here in the House with bipartisan support. It passed last week in the Senate 59-2. We ran out of time in the House Commerce Committee to hear it. And my request this afternoon, and I'd appreciate your support for a suspension of the rules so we can take it up, is to declare an urgency so that we can take this bill up today. There's 2 weeks left in session. When you have firefighters in Minnesota that are dying of cancer because of products that cause cancer and flame retardants, that's an urgency. I'd appreciate your support for this motion, Mr. Speaker and members, and I'd ask for a roll call, please.
A roll call being requested, and seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Stearns, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Atkins, this is my bill, and I sure appreciate you bringing this motion to take it forward. But we just had a meeting on this morning with all the interested parties. They're taking this stuff back to actually see if we can get a movement and get an agreement on the bill so we can move it forward. So due to the fact that we just had the meeting this morning, I don't think that's time enough to have that discussion and bring that to see whether we can get the members together. The other point is when you say it's an urgent need and a sense of urgency, I agree we need to get this done, but the enacting clauses are in 2017 and 2018. So to say that we need to work on this and act on it today, I want to get this thing passed, but I don't believe that having it done today is an urgent need when the enacting clauses are 17 and 18. As much as I want to get this passed as much as anybody does, I don't think today is the day to do it.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Howe yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Schoen.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Howe, can you give us some highlights as to what needs to be done yet for the work on the bill, considering that the Senate passed it with only 2 negative votes?
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Schoen, we've discussed exactly what we want to cover in the bill. So there's some discussions on whether we want to cover draperies, wall coverings, those types of ideas. And there's some discussions on, there's 10 chemicals in the bill. We've already agreed to possibly 2 of those coming out, and there's 4 of them that we're still in discussions on exactly whether they need to be in or out. So we've got an agreement on 3 of them definitely are in. I believe there's probably 4 of them that are in, and so we've just got a few more, and there's 2 that are going to be taken out completely. We've had agreement on that, and we're actually in discussion about 4 of the chemicals that whether we're going to, how we're going to treat them, and whether there needs to be a little bit different language. So that's where we're at currently. They've taken that information back, and we're hoping to bring that forward and get some conclusion and a final bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, well, I think Representative Howe has done a lot of good work on this so far, and it's unfortunate that it hasn't made it out of committee thus far. And seeing is that it's had a lot of progress, and it appears there must be a good agreement made already, that the other body has done a lot of great work on this already. Not to give them a lot of credit for something, but by golly, I think we should support Representative Atkins and Representative Howe by moving this bill forward and giving the credit where credit is due.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Atkins, for bringing this motion forward. And Representative Howe, I want to thank you for carrying this bill this year. As you know, this bill is of particular importance to me. And I think I would be very surprised if everybody in this body didn't agree that there is certainly things that we can do to make things safer for children and for firefighters all across the state of Minnesota. And members, this bill, this has been in the works for quite a while. We're 16 weeks into this session. There's been ample time and ample opportunity for folks that have been opposed to provisions in this bill to talk about options, and I think that those conversations are continuing, and I would encourage that to continue to happen. But the fact of the matter is we have, just 2 weeks left in this session. And with respect to the enacting clauses, you're right. There's no immediate urgency from that perspective, but the reality is that we would like to see this get passed, taken up here on the House floor tonight and get passed and sent into conference committee. And there's really no greater incentive for folks that are opposed to something to reach an agreement to see it go to conference committee where they'll have ample opportunity to air out some of those things. But members, before we get to a vote, I just want to talk about, and Representative Atkins alluded to this a little bit, but just the significance of the importance of what's in this bill. And this is, not necessarily uncharted territory. There's 3 states in the nation, we would be the 4th, that have passed similar legislation, and this did pass in the Senate 59-2. But essentially, this is the base of what brought this to be is a NIOSH study, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, which performs a lot of studies across our country. And this one spanned 50 years, members, 50 years, starting in 1960 to 2009. And they studied 30,000 career firefighters. And what they found, as Representative Atkins alluded to earlier, was a 62% increased rate of getting esophageal cancer. In addition to that, those 30,000 firefighters, career firefighters, twice the risk for testicular cancer and a 51% increased risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So this is important to us.
Mr. Speaker.
This is important to children across the state of Minnesota, and I certainly would hope that you could find it in your hearts to vote green tonight.
Representative Albright, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. What order of business is before the body?
We are on declaring an urgency on House File 1215. The member from Ramsey, Representative Uruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As to whether it could be considered urgent to vote on something now that has an enacting date later, because this involves consumer goods, there needs to be time for the manufacturers of those goods to accommodate the change in statute. It's not something that can happen overnight. So there can be an urgency now, even when the rules don't go into effect until later. There's an urgency for me to be able to go to somebody and say, we got this done. One of the firefighters that was here today is somebody I've known for a long time. His parents go to my church, and he grew up in that church. And he lives in Duluth now, but his parents are still there. And I know that as he was growing up, one of his role models for being a firefighter was one of the other members of our church, longtime member. I've known him for 30 years. And I'm not going to name him because I don't want to give away private information attached to his name. This man's a retired firefighter, and he currently has one of the invasive brain cancers that's on the list of conditions that are at a higher frequency among firefighters because of these chemicals. So we need to do the urgency so we can get people on board and get this moving. And I would really hope that I could go to my friend and tell him that at least we're taking care of these young people, like the firefighter that I got to talk to today. Thank you.
The member from Stearns, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I've had good friends of mine. After retiring, after 26 years in the professional fire service, I do believe that this is the utmost important. I would love to get this thing passed. But I've watched some of my fellow fire investigators and firefighters die of cancer. No doubt about it. That's why I'm carrying the bill. But I don't believe today is the day to pass a sense of urgency. I would let us work the finer points of this bill out with the people that have issues, with all the interested parties, and let's pass the bill so it looks good. And I urge us not to suspend the rules. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Howe yield?
He will yield, Representative Clark.
Representative Howe, you mentioned that there was a meeting earlier today and that there was some sort of agreement to remove 2 flame retardants from the bill. Can you tell me which ones those were?
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I'm not a chemist, and it's going to be difficult for me to pronounce these because it's the alphabet soup when you look at this stuff. And I don't know if you have the bill. Do you have the bill in hand? Okay, so it's tetrabromobiophenol A. And this one's a little easier, but antimony, those are the 2. If you want the chemical numbers, they're probably easier to follow. But those are the 2 that we've agreed that we can probably remove from the list.
Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can you tell me why those 2 would be removed, what the argument against having them included is?
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We kind of agree that antimony is in a lot of different things, but they don't believe it's used in the products that we're discussing. And the other one, the TBBA, if I can do that for you, that one, it's only really used in electronics. So the application, and that's really with both of them, it's where the application of both of those chemicals really doesn't affect what we're talking about. So, and if it's used in the electronics, it's not really to a level where it causes a big hazard.
Representative Clark.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Howe, I guess 2 things. One is about process. I would wish that this kind of discussion and the ability to critique whether or not any of these should be removed would happen in an open hearing, in a committee, so we could actually talk about it and hear both sides of the argument, the scientific evidence. I think this list was carefully crafted. I've actually worked on these issues with flame retardants for many years, and I'm so happy that we had this bill, and I thought we would really have some good bipartisan leadership here. But I think when you start removing certain chemicals, when they have been carefully researched and put in a bill, in a private meeting, that really raises some questions. And so I just wanted to bring that to the body's attention, that these flame retardants are serious. And when you have them in electronics, that doesn't mean that they're not important. you know, they are in our carpets, in our curtains and so on, but they're also in electronics and a few other places that raise serious issues with cancer. And I just want to point out that we are not tracking yet. We're not tracking whether or not people in any particular profession have more cancer than others. And in this particular proposal points out to me that we need to do that as well. That's not the subject of this bill, but I just really am so pleased that we were getting somewhere with understanding that where people work and the kind of jobs they have can really lead to higher incidences of cancer. And as pointed out, our firefighters who provide so much service to us have just an unbelievable level of cancer. And I've heard some of the testimony from individuals and their families about this. So I do think that we should go ahead, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, and bring this bill up. And I would just urge Representative Howe to help us with that, because I think you have the right commitment and the right idea. We just need to get it done. Thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Winkler votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Winkler votes aye. There being 59 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. There's a motion at the desk.
Pillai moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended that House File Number 2296 be recalled from the Committee on Agriculture Finance, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to your motion.
Thank you, Speaker. We've done a good job of working bipartisanly to deal with the avian flu issue, and what I'm hoping to do is to move forward in a standalone bill the language that the governor's office needs to make sure they have the funds available to deal with the avian flu. That's what this motion has to do with. A roll call.
A roll call being requested, and seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. When it comes to the avian influenza issue, I failed to recognize the number of people who have been directly involved in this. And I'm going to start by saying thank you to Governor Dayton and also Lieutenant Governor Smith. Along with that, our Speaker and our Majority Leader for recognizing how important this is and allocating the funds. I also want to say thank you to the Deputy Chief of Staff, Ms. Hardy. She's been fantastic leading this whole thing. Commissioner Fredrickson, Commissioner Franz, we've worked very close with Commissioner Franz as well, the Department of Health. And the Department of Health, we put in a request to meet with them, and within 1 hour, when Mr. Nisley put in the request, within 1 hour, we had 2 representatives from the Department of Health sitting in the office in which I occupy. They were very, very responsive to this issue. The Board of Animal Health, I cannot say enough about the Board of Animal Health. Dr. Hartman and everybody that's affiliated with that, thank you for your leadership and what you're doing around this. University of Minnesota, the VDL, Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, Dr. Jim Collins. We have Dean Brian Boer, Dr. Trevor Ames, Dean Bev Durgan, everybody from the University of Minnesota and others taking it very, very seriously. Mr. Santo Cruz from the Department of Agriculture. The Minnesota Poultry Testing Laboratory out in Wilmer. Representative Baker's been out there personally, met with the people to say thank you for the hard work. Mr. Steve Olson with the turkey growers, poultry growers, all the producers that have been involved. You know, we have the Pomeroy chair, from the College of Veterinary Medicine as far as an expert on avian influenza, Dr. Cardona. The Minnesota National Guard has been working directly in this. The USDA, there's over 200 additional employees, state and federal people that have been working on this, and our food supply is safe. Why do I bring all that up? We have worked very hard with a number of people. We have responded accordingly. When they needed additional funds to fund the Department of Ag and the Board of Animal Health, it was Representative Bly that moved it as far as emergency on the House floor, and all of us responded accordingly, and we answered that call. Then what did we do? Like I said, with our leadership as well and others, we funded additional dollars to the bill that we just passed, and we passed the language that was specifically brought forth by the governor's office as well. Friends, we are addressing this. We have addressed this, we are addressing this, and we will continue to address this. We have done great work in the Omnibus Agriculture Finance Bill. It is in the bill. It is moving forward. You have our commitment, and I ask that we do not support this motion because, like I said, we are addressing this. Thank you.
Further discussion to the motion? Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hamilton, for that long list of everyone who's been involved in this issue. The reason that I'm bringing this forward and asking for the suspension of the rules is that the Governor's office has requested a standalone bill, a bill that can move on its own and won't be held up by conference committees or whatever. So that's the reason I'm asking for the suspension of the rules, to get the money as quickly as we can to where it needs to go and make sure the governor is not impeded in any way and the agencies are not impeded in any way. I understand that the Department of Ag is concerned about the funds that they have and making sure that they're in place, and I would hate to think that we would delay things and for whatever reason and not get it done.
Further discussion on the Bly motion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really don't understand the opposition to this. It really is just letting this run on a parallel track. It's a bill that passed with lots and lots of support just a few minutes ago. And if we can move this separately, we can make sure that this gets done and doesn't get caught up in any other politics. And I know that nobody wants this issue to get caught up in any other politics. So if we were able to take this up today, it's essentially the bill that we've already passed. We could get this over to the Senate and actually moving separately, just as we did previously, to get at least some relief out the door. So members, this is our chance to act in the best interest of the state of Minnesota and to make sure that we can deal with this crisis that we're facing in a meaningful way, in a rapid way, in a quick way. And I think that's what everybody wants. So I would encourage a yes vote.
Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. Announcements. The member from Mauer, Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd just like to, on behalf of the I-90 Coalition, invite people to tomorrow evening. We will have the opportunity for turkey burgers at lunchtime, but we'll have an opportunity for pork chops in the evening. And that will be at Kellogg Square. It's an invitation to members to be able to come. It's both House and Senate bipartisanly. The I-90 coalition is made up of the legislators that serve along the interstate on the southern part of the state, and beginning around 5:30 tomorrow evening. So it may be difficult to find parking because it will be at Kellogg Square, which is fairly close to the Excel. But if you want to carpool, walk down, or come by light rail, that would be great, and we invite you to join us. Thank you.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, just also want to thank you, Representative Poppy, for the reminder. Also, at lunch, just a reminder to stop in front of the Capitol for turkey burgers as summer begins. And that means grilling season begins. We just want to kind of reinstate with the folks across the state of Minnesota that turkey's a great food, a good, safe protein for everyone to use. And we just want to invite you all to come and grab a free burger and enjoy time and take time to communicate with your newsletters and that they send out to your constituents that what a great industry the turkey production is in the state of Minnesota, and that is a good, safe option this summer, regardless of what's going on with avian influenza. So thank you very much.
Announcements. The Majority Leader, Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, May 5th, 2015.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, May 5th, 2015. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails. Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. The House is adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, May 5th, 2015.